Welcome to the Disruptor Network podcast.
Welcome back to the Disruptors Network podcast. And we have a really, really interesting guest today, especially for the real estate crowd. Jon Schoeller, who's known as the Frugal investor on Instagram, has flipped over 180 properties at this point. He's a young guy who's done a lot in the flipping business. He also has a great YouTube channel with his wife, and that's under his name, Jon Schoeller, where they kind of talk about everything you need to know about real estate, whether it's flipping or buying or investing. But he kind of went from nothing to being somebody whose net worth is in the millions now. On his own, completely self-made, and how he did it is effective for other people who are trying to do it. So Jon's a great guest. He's going to be really, really informative to that crowd that loves real estate and wants to do more or wants to get started. So without further ado, Jon Schoeller.
Ignition. Liftoff.
Welcome back to the Disruptors Network podcast, and we have a great guest today. I gave you an intro that you've flipped 150 houses already, so you have a lot to speak about, but welcome, Jon Schoeller.
I appreciate you having me on.
So first of all, dude, I want to tell you that your YouTube is awesome. You and your wife have a great energy, and it really gives people a lot of insight into real estate. I know that your beginnings weren't in real estate; you kind of found it. But can you talk a little bit about just your start in this and how you got started at 21 in this business, and how you've I know you've been in some other businesses too, but how you started and how you've gotten to the point where you are now?
Absolutely, I'll try to give you a Cliff Note version because there's a lot to it, but. I've always been entrepreneurial, like spirited. I tried to go to college there for a little bit and it wasn't working. I always tell people I was getting hundreds and even 105, 110s on my tests in business classes, but I was failing everything else. So I was working for a company at the time that had a little bit to do with like moving and delivery service. And I was like, well, why don't I just start my own service? And there's a lot more that goes into that, but that's essentially what I did. I built that up. It was a moving company and a delivery company in Charlottesville, Virginia. And about 8-9 years into that, I sold it. And my wife and I, who she just finished nursing school, decided to go travel nursing. So I sold the business. We sold everything we had, and we started traveling around the country, mostly to LA, Palo Alto, multiple places in California, Maui, Hawaii. We lived in all these places and did that for 2 years. And I went stir crazy. I was a super busy person, always working on something, building something, answering to customers for 8-9 years. Then all of a sudden I went cold on that. And it wasn't really the money anymore. It was more, I just needed something to work on and something to do. So I started educating myself in real estate. At this time, we're living in California and Maui and places like that where it's super expensive to get started. So I just educated myself and went to meetings. My wife then decided to go back to nurse anesthesia school and got accepted here in Charleston, West Virginia. And I said, all right, well, that's going to take you at least 3 years to finish that. In that time, I'm flipping a house. So we made it a goal to flip 5 houses in the time that we were here, and had a couple financial goals. So I started researching before we got here, who's flipping houses, who's doing what. I looked them all up. I scheduled meetings with all of them. And within the first couple of months, I had met with all of them. And up until Andrew and Steve, my now partners. And it's just a weird story. We don't have all day here, but basically I went to a meeting with Andrew. Then I met with his partner, Steve, my partner now. And we started off as what it was going to be just me, a week of me shadowing them. We figured out quickly that I had a skill set they needed. They had all the resources and knowledge on real estate that I needed. We collided and never looked back. And we've been flipping houses it'll be 5 years in March. March 1st will be 5 years. And we've now done over 180 houses.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's a very specific part of the business, especially flipping houses, that, people see it and they think, oh, I want to flip a house. And I'm sure that's kind of how you got into it originally. And it's not easy. Have you, now that, the market's been crazy, obviously, for a couple of years, are you seeing it become harder and harder because margins are smaller and smaller on that stuff? I mean, how do you view the flipping market now compared to what it was when you started?
Yeah, deals are fewer and far between, of course, because people can just list their properties on the MLS and get, $10,000, $20,000 over asking. Everybody's comps went up and everybody could get more for their houses. So it was harder for us, people that come in and buy these deals, they weren't there anymore. People just said, well, why wouldn't I just list it for that price? And they were right. And so you have to get creative. You have to start looking at different things. And so, the thing that we have always had a niche was, we're in West Virginia. Almost every house we buy has a structural problem. So we like to target houses that have a humongous problem that can't get a loan on it. These are structural, roof, drainage issues, things that a bank will not lend on. And the people don't have the money to fix it themselves. So we target that audience. So oftentimes a structural issue can cost 10, 20, 30, up to $60,000. The homeowner doesn't have that to repair it, to get it on the market, to get it sold through a traditional mortgage. So they have to sell it to a cash buyer like ourselves. So it's just about getting creative with things like that.
Yeah, and that's really a good tip for the audience too, because you found a niche that something you're really good at that not everybody can do.
Correct.
And so, I obviously, as you started in flipping properties, and I've listened to some of your videos. You're like, I'm frugal and I'm cheap and I save and all this stuff, right? And I think that's great, because I think that's important to tell people. How at the beginning did you stretch your money, but still kind of make the right moves for your long-term wealth, right? So how did you stretch the money, the little money that you had at the beginning, to do the things that you were doing in real estate?
Yeah, so I started off what most would describe as cheap, and now I'm frugal. And frugal has kind of a negative connotation with it with a lot of people, but I'd call frugal just intentional spending. Like, we still spend money. I've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars traveling, but it's intentionally spent. Instead of buying, fancy cars and watches and clothes and things like that, it's just, what I tell people is prioritize. There's a really good quote that says, don't give up what you want most for what you want right now. And I love that quote so much. And oftentimes people do that. They get caught up in the shopping or the newest gadgets or the newest things. They really, really want to take a trip this year, but they spend all their money on Black Friday or shopping on things that they didn't want as much as that trip, but they wanted them right now. They could have it right now. So what I tell people is, the biggest things you need is a budget. If you don't have a budget, I promise you, you will either fail at whatever you're trying to reach, or you will lose money. You will misplace it. You will mismanage it if you are not tracking it. And so I always tell people, have a budget and then prioritize what's most important to you. Write down all your wants. Okay. Your needs have to be filled. There's a huge difference. You need to define needs versus wants, first of all, but write down all of your wants and then prioritize those. Right. So if there's a pair of shoes on there and there's also a trip to Maldives, which one's more important to you? Because very few people can have everything. Right? Very few people can have it all. Now, if you're making that type of money, I always tell people this too. There's no right or wrong answer to this. If you're making that type of money and you can buy all the shoes, go to Maldives and fly a private jet, do you, right? But most people will have to make sacrifices somewhere along the way, or always. And so just make sure you're prioritizing what you want most versus what you want right now.
Yeah, I love that, especially what you said about budgeting. And I always tell people, like, the first step to buying a house, in my opinion, is to figure out what your real budget is. Forget about what the banks are telling you, what all that stuff. Like, what is your real budget? What tips can you give somebody for making a budget and setting the right one to kind of win over time?
Yeah. So when I do coaching, I do financial coaching as well. And when I first get my clients, what I have them do is, for 30 days, I want you to use a notebook. I don't want you to use an app or anything like that. I know there's software out there that tracks it, but writing it down gives you accountability and reminds you. And it almost like gives it like a different feeling towards it than just plugging in an app or letting your bank app do it for you. You don't really pay attention to that. So get you a blank notebook, and I want you to write needs and wants on 2 different pieces of paper or on 2 different pages. And every month you write down your needs, what you spend, or for the whole month, you write down your needs. These are things like your rent, your mortgage, your food, things like that. Food within reason. Eating out is a want, not a need. So you write down all your needs. And then on the other page, you write down everything that you bought that was a want. And you're not going to try to control this in any way. This is just for tracking. And then at the end of 30 days, you're going to see where you're at. Your needs can be adjusted a little bit, but usually very little, right? You can't really just call your landlord up and be like, hey, I want to pay less rent, or call your mortgage, all right? But you could call your cable company and lower your bill, or drop cable. You could call your insurance company and get that readjusted and see if you could get a lower rate. So that can be adjusted a little bit, but usually not as much. Now your wants is where you can knock out the money, right? So if you're eating at Chipotle 15 times a month, right, you're probably going over your food budget for most people. So you need to figure that out. So write all that down and then say, okay, well, where can I cut? Right. And you start cutting these things out, or prioritizing, like I said, because the goal here is nobody wants to be miserable. Nobody wants to live miserable. Nobody wants to go forever without wants, or never eat out, or any of those things. Right. That's not sustainable. For a short time, maybe, but nobody wants that for a long term. So prioritize. Right. So that's how I always tell people to start with their budgets. And then you got to figure out what your goals are. What are you saving for? What's the money for? You saving up for a mortgage? Okay, then what's your down payment? I loved your point. Don't listen to what the bank's telling you or a calculator on the computer. They don't have to pay your mortgage. You do. Okay. And they also can't foresee problems that you might see. Maybe you have a medical condition. Maybe you have a child that has a medical condition. And that could be a big expense that pops up in 6-8 months from now that the calculator or your mortgage provider can't see. And frankly, it's not their job to look out for that. And their job is to get you a mortgage, right?
Yeah, correct.
So they're not gonna probably give you all the what ifs over a 20-30 year mortgage that could happen. That's your job.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think you're right. Just it's very simple, like needs and wants, and just write it all down every single month. And you can see it plain as day what you have to cut. But that's really good advice, because you're right with the mortgage companies and the mortgage calculators. They don't look at your groceries and your car insurance and your medical bills. Like they're not looking at any of that stuff. So that's really, really good advice. So some of the stuff I saw in your background is similar to me. I've always been kind of an entrepreneur by spirit, and I've always owned businesses outside of my business, right? So I've had gyms, barbershops, music companies, small loan, everything. And what I found for myself is that anything that I couldn't dedicate myself 100% to has only succeeded to a certain level, and then I never kind of am able to push through. I know that you've had other businesses. So what advice can you give to somebody who's trying to do a lot of different things that are not necessarily in the same field? And what has been your experience with that?
So yeah, so this it's personality based for me, like so much like personal finance. But there are I had a lot of irons in the fire, and I still do. I own a gym as well, and I've owned several businesses. I probably have 8 LLCs right now. And that's not, you say that and it almost sounds like cool or like bragging, but oftentimes it cannot be cool. Because like you just said, just you can have 100 LLCs and not make any money. Okay. So the number of LLCs, the number of businesses you have, all that stuff is really just a number. It sounds cool for those who don't know better, but the bottom line is what matters the most in all this, right? Is it making you money? And also important, are you happy with it? Right. So, what if all 8 of my LLCs made $10 million each? That's incredible. Right. But what if it had no time for my wife and daughter? What if I had no time to go to the gym and take care of my health? Then it's not as cool. Right. So there's a huge balance to be found here. And I think what you're speaking on and what I found as well is I've had to figure out, like, I almost got caught up to the point one time where I was making money to make money. Like it almost didn't even become a goal. There wasn't even like a goal set for it. I was just caught up in like the game of it all, just chasing the next dollar and like forming LLCs and partnerships left and right. And I think what I had to figure out for me, again, I think this comes back to like the budget. I had to prioritize. I had to write down in life what's most important to me. Is that my wife and daughter? Is it traveling 3 or 4 months out of the year? Is it taking care of my health? Or is it growing a multi-corporation conglomerate, being like a Grant Cardone? And this to each their own. There's no right or wrong answer here. But you've got to figure out that answer for you. And one more time to your point is like, yes, it becomes extremely difficult to you can't focus 100% of your time anyway. You only have a certain amount of time. But it becomes extremely difficult to focus enough time on each business to make each one of them flourish as if they're supposed to, unless you get lucky and hire right in each one of those companies, which is a trick in itself.
All right, yeah. That's probably the hardest thing, to find good people to work with that you can grow with. What is your main focus now today? Is your flipping business the main focus for you, or is it what are you spending the majority of your time with on a daily basis at this point?
Yeah, I would say that A&M Investments, the flipping company with my partners, is probably, and it's for several reasons there. It's we worked really hard in the beginning to get that thing where it is today. We had to go through a lot of heartache and trouble to get that, even within our partnership. If you've been to have partners, it's not the easiest thing. We're in a good place now. We're family, but the first 2 years, we almost didn't make it, and we had to figure it out. So with all that time and energy put in there, and I love what I do, I'm really good at what I do within the company and my partnership, and also my responsibility to my partners, right? Let's not forget about that. If you form a partnership with somebody and then you go off and start all these other businesses and give those more attention, that's not the most moral thing to do for your partners who signed up with you as this person that had more time to give, right? That's what they were counting on. So I would say the flipping business mostly, absolutely. And then, really working on my YouTube would probably come after that as far as professionally. I put a lot of time and energy in that, both my wife and I.
Yeah. And you can tell, you guys do a really good job. And I think it's really if you're anybody who's looking into real estate, I think it's great. And I like that you guys, I try to be transparent. I like you guys are very transparent. And I know you mentioned your daughter. I know you just went through that process of adopting a child, which is amazing. Can you talk about a little bit like how hard that was and how it affected your life and your business for you and your wife a little bit going through that whole entire process?
Yeah. So it was about 4 years ago now that my wife and I said, we could probably do a little bit more to help out. We don't want kids. We don't want to ever have kids or have kids of our own. We didn't hate kids or anything like that. We just were really busy and we loved our free time to travel and with each other. And I said, but we could probably, my wife had the initial idea and said, what if we fostered? And I said, I think we could do that. So let's sign up and let's foster. And at the time, there was an option when you sign up to foster to go ahead and do a little bit more to be approved for adoption. It was almost the same process, a few things here. And I was like, well, let's just do it. You never know. We'll just go through the whole process. And it was about 3 years ago. 2 years and like 5 months ago, give or take, that we got a phone call. We got several phone calls before that, but we got a phone call and finally got a yes, and a baby was being brought to us, who's now our daughter. And she was dropped off, and it was just supposed to be a foster situation. We were just fostering, and we were fine with that. It's difficult because you got to go at it with, hey, this child won't be in your life forever, but you love them as so anyway. It's hard not to. Yeah. I joked that I fell in love immediately when she hit my arms, but really within the first 2 to 3 months, she's my daughter. There was no difference to me. So then we went through a long process. So this isn't what this podcast is about, but yes, it was a process. And it took about 2 years. And finally, this year, just before her 3rd birthday, we finally adopted her. That's awesome. And she's now ours. And and so now we're adoptive parents. Well, we're parents now. We're parents, and and how we manage that. It's difficult. The kids are an extra thing in your life. But what my wife and I are really good at and had to learn to be good at is time management. So if we still want to run our YouTube channels, we want to run our other businesses, we want our time for each other. Well, we have this extra person in our life now that needs a ton of time. How do we do this? Well, we're going to have to sacrifice some evenings on the Netflix. We're going to have to go to gym. This one thing that we sacrificed that was huge for us, it might be small to other people, but we don't go to the gym together anymore because we can't both be at the gym and watch the baby. So we had to split up our gym time. And keep in mind, we went to the gym together at the same time for almost 12 years. Right. So we had to sacrifice that. Yeah. So things like that. And, but it all comes down to prioritizing your time. Everybody's got extra time in the day. Almost everybody's got extra time. You will need to sacrifice some things and some leisure time if you want to be successful in your other endeavors.
Yeah. It's funny. I have 2 children, they're 8 and 6. And I actually disclosed this to my wife the other day before I had my son, who's 8. I don't think I even, I think I was just having children because that was the thing you did, right? Like, I don't think that I knew that I actually wanted to be a father until he was here. And then my daughter came after, but then once they were here, it was like, it became everything, you know what I mean? Like, it totally changed my perspective on, and it's funny because you're talking about time, because it totally changed my perspective on time. Like, I got much more hyper-focused on how I segmented my time because of them. So do you think that in a way that it's even made you better at what you're doing because you have this other person you have to consider, and you're much more conscious of how you spend your time?
I think so. Yes. I think it made me more efficient in my work life, but also it slowed me down in my work life. Like, I know for a fact, I enjoy my time with my wife and my daughter more than anything else. So that was an easy thing to prioritize for me. So now when a new business endeavor or partnership pops up, where before Tiana, our daughter, I just had to run it by my wife, who was usually on board and would jump in this endeavor with me. Yeah. Well, Tiana doesn't have that choice, right? She can't go to all these endeavors and all these work trips and all this stuff. So it's a quick decision for me. Okay, what's the partnership or what's the endeavor? How much of my time will it take? And how much time do I need to sacrifice with my daughter? And now it's a quick equation for me. And so I like that. It helped me slow down professionally to say what really matters to me. Money matters. Money absolutely matters. Being productive and having something to work on absolutely matters for me and my personality. I discovered that quickly when I was depressed for the 2 years that we took off, or that I took off from working. But you got to figure out your own personality and what matters to you most outside of that, and it's going to be a different answer for everybody.
Yeah, and you brought that up, and that kind of brings it. When you took off the 2 years, and it was kind of affecting you mentally, did you realize it while you were in it? Like, hey, I need to be active. I need to be working on something to kind of I need my brain to be almost challenged on a daily basis to feel good about myself. Did it occur to you before, like, you went back to work? Did you realize that was the issue?
Thankfully, my wife knows me better than I know myself. So she thought it would be a problem selling the company and all that. She really made me think it through, but I knew that if I didn't get outside my comfort zone, I wouldn't grow at all. The moving company was doing great. I was making good money, but it was intensive labor. I was on almost every move. I couldn't find good people. And while we were making great money, I was stuck where I grew up. And I'm really an advocate of, even if it's just for a year, get out of where you live, get around different people, different mindset, different ideas. And I was, at this time, I'm 27, 28, and I haven't done that yet. I've lived within 30-mile radius of where I was born.
Yeah.
So I was just like, now we don't have kids. We were debt free. I had some money saved up. My wife had a good paying job, and they were going to pay for wherever we lived with travel nursing. Why not? So we kind of did it. And I did have those thoughts. I thought, what if I get bored? And I was like, no, I need to relax. Because when you're working really hard, a relaxation or a break sounds incredible.
Yes.
And it did. So to me at the time, it did. And my wife was a little worried. So to your point here, it was about the first 3 months went okay. And I owner financed my business. So I still had some things to work on.
Money coming in.
Yeah, money coming in, and I was still helping in it a little bit. It was giving me enough. Well, after about a year, I was bought out, and there was nothing left for me to do. And that's when it was like, oh boy, my wife's at work for 12 hours. I'm literally sitting on the couch because we only had one car or two because we were travel nursing. I was like, what? And I got to do something. And I got backwards there for a little bit. I knew when it was bad, when I was sitting depressed as I could possibly be, oceanfront in Maui. And I had money I want people to hear this. I had money in the bank. My wife was making good money. I have a beautiful supporting wife. I had what a lot of people would be happy with, but I had nothing to work on. And
you were in a perfect place. You were in the paradise.
I was oceanfront Maui, paid for. They were paying for it. And I was still not happy because I didn't have a purpose.
Yeah, I came to the same realization you did about, because I've always been somebody who worked a lot, and everybody's like, can't you turn it off? Can't you turn it off? And I started to realize that that's just who I was. Like, I'm most comfortable in that way. And I can, like, we were on vacation last week for New Year's. The week between Christmas and New Year's is really dead for me. So we were and I was able to decompress and hang out with my family and not be on the phone. But most of the time I kind of need to be in that. It just makes me a better functional human being if I have that every single day, right? So I totally get where you're coming from, which is why when you said it, it really resonated with me.
Yeah, I also have a really strong desire to teach. So it's like, I have no reason to do podcasts, really. I mean, but I have a desire, like no financial incentive really to do podcasts, but I enjoy doing this because if somebody could hear this message, if they could, if they do something with their life that they otherwise wouldn't have done, that ROI for me is absolutely incredible. I love that feeling when I get messages saying, hey, John, I listened to a podcast or I listened to one of your posts or saw one of your YouTube videos, and now I've done such and such. That's incredible feeling for me.
Yeah. I think you get, and that's a good point too. I think you get to a point, and I try to tell people this all the time. And I think that, I want people to understand that it's genuine. Like, there's no money in the world that I can make with you that would make it worth it for me. Like, I have to get something out of it that's outside of money, because, and then you realize at this point, you've gotten to a point in life that money's not going to make you happy, right? Like you have to have another purpose outside of money. So I like that you said that, because I feel the same. I have a yearning to educate people. And the only way you can really you can offer value to people is if you're still actively doing stuff yourself, right? So you can't, it's hard. Along those lines, what are you doing currently to kind of educate yourself? Like, whether it's books or podcasts, or, what could you recommend to people to be helpful to educate themselves?
Yeah, I could do better myself. And it's actually kind of a New Year's resolution for me this year is to do more reading, and I do have to do the audiobooks. I have a really bad ADHD brain. Like I was diagnosed at a young age, and I fought it my whole life. And I I've had to adjust a lot of things accordingly and put a lot of systems in place to help me with that. And reading's hard for me. Like if I read a page, I have to read it 4 times. Okay. Because my mind's elsewhere most of the time. So I need to educate. I'm looking over here at my pile of books over here right now. And actually, when somebody gives me a book, I keep it. I'm looking at them all over here. I keep them all. And I won't get rid of that book or donate it or give it to somebody until I've downloaded the audio version of it, the audiobook version, and listen to it. Right. So it almost holds me accountable. I can't get rid of this book until I read it. If I won't physically read it, then I have to listen to it. So that YouTube is an incredible source. I mean, there's so much knowledge out there. We are spoiled rotten from what our parents and grandparents had to do. Remember, if they wanted to look something up like what we're talking about here today, they had to go to the library. They had to go to the library, or they had to travel a far distance, or they had to somehow network through a house phone and meet the right investor. I can get on Instagram today and find 15 investors in my area, right? And meet with probably 10 of them. Okay. Or you could just download a podcast like yours and listen to all this knowledge that people are dropping from people that are actually doing it, and that aren't really selling to you. I'm not selling anything to you here. I'm literally just dropping knowledge. So it's really genuine. And it's podcast, YouTube, books, of course, but I'll always say the most important thing to do, the most important thing to do for me that I ever did was get around the right people. Okay. When I went out of my way, I got extremely fortunate with Andrew and Steve. I absolutely did. And I worked my way into the system, but to find the system and get in the system, and just to be happy in the place where I lived. But guess what? I had to take action to reach out to them. They wouldn't have known me from Adam. So I had to say, hey, so-and-so, I see you're doing it. I see you're doing what I want to do. What can I do to incentivize you to meet with me and share that knowledge? Right? And everybody has a need, and you can figure out a way to fill that void somehow, some way. You've got to be creative sometimes, but get around the right people as soon as you can. I'm not saying, I think there's an exaggeration out there that you got to drop all your old friends. No, but you got to get new ones. Yeah. Okay. So if your old friends aren't taking you or not talking about what you want to be talking about and doing the things that you want to do, then you need to introduce some more people into your life and hang out with them equally. Otherwise, you're probably not going to have much momentum.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million good points in there, and I think that. By the way, I changed the audiobooks about 18 months ago, just 30 minutes a day, and it was life changing. So, and I do it while I exercise. I kind of just like task, but it helped. So definitely. But the thing you said about new people, I think that's important that you said that, and people should take recognition of that, because you need to meet people as the person you are today, right? Like the person you are now is different than the person you were 15 years ago. So I think that's a really good point you said. Like when you meet people as you are now, I'm sure that they treat you differently than they would have as if it was 12 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And so it's just like, I think leaving some friends behind will help stabilize your life today, which is important, especially if they're friends. Yeah. But if you want to accelerate your life forward, I think you need to get around some people that will pull you in that direction as well. Just like bad friends can pull you backwards, great friends can pull you forwards. Yeah, and I had to figure that out myself, and that was my biggest thing. The books and all that stuff gave me a base knowledge, but I needed somebody to show me that it could truly be done and almost help guide me, and I found those people.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good advice. I recently gotten very heavy into short-term rentals over like the last 2.5 years. Boy, I have a decent amount of them, and I know I've seen that you added that into kind of what you're doing. What do you think about that market? Where do you think it's going? How invested are you in it that you think that it's something you should add, other people should add?
So yes, actually the YouTube video you saw, we do have a couple that we're starting here in Charleston, but the YouTube video you saw was it was actually an Airbnb in Gatlinburg, Tennessee that I just went, it was $1 million Airbnb that I went and filmed for my YouTube channel. Oh, cool. On my YouTube, I show a lot of before and after house videos. But if I don't have that content to film for that week, sometimes I'll film like an abandoned mansion, or I'll film a really cool house. Well, I was following this guy. Have you followed Mike and Jill Elefante on?
I've seen them. I don't follow, but I have seen them.
Okay, so Mike and Jill, they did a lot of the right things at the perfect time. Okay, I'm not discounting them in any way, and they would agree with this. They invested in Airbnbs about 2 years ago, down around COVID hit. Airbnb started taking off. Last 2 years, Airbnb short-term rentals exploded, both for rentals and investors investing in them. And then on top of that, the Gatlinburg market was one of the best in the nation. Okay, so they bought his numbers. He does all this on his TikTok. You can look him up, Mike Elefante. But that house I stayed in, they bought it for $400,000. They put about 100 grand into it with furniture and repairs and everything like that. And I think that they cash flowed 100 grand on that property, one property last year. And not only that, but it appreciated to $1 million because of what investors would pay based on the revenue it's bringing in. So they paid 400, put 100 into it. These are rough numbers, but he'll walk you through all of his Airbnbs. But they, on 4 or 5 properties, they cash flowed. This is after all expenses, made $250,000 in cash flow on 5 properties. I personally know people with 100 units that don't make that money.
Yeah, I mean, I found that the Airbnb rentals, and I have a lot of long-term rentals for a lot of years, but I found like the Airbnb rentals, I'm making 2 to 3 times as much on the Airbnb that I was on long-term rentals. Listen, and you know, that's the glamour side of it. The hard side of it is that it's a lot more work. And like you, I have help from my wife, and she does all the bookings and that kind of stuff. Because I think if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. Because it's just, you know, I came home yesterday and she was like, this person staying for a month is driving me nuts. They messaged me 5 times. If they would have messaged me 5 times, they probably would have gone unanswered. So, you know, I think that's the other side of it. But I do see it. So I'm happy to hear that you've kind of heard the same things around that.
Yeah. So I always tell people, instead of dealing with one tenant, now you're dealing with 30, 40, 50 plus on one property in a year. And so you got all those different personalities, right? And everybody's going to treat the house differently. Now the payoff is there, but the work is usually there too. Now, if you can find a perfect system where you got a great property manager and you never hear a word, then absolutely go for it.
Yeah. More money always equals more problems. And that's the reality of life at this point.
Most of the time, I always tell somebody there's no such thing as truly passive income. Although I would argue that I do a lot of private money lending personally. I think that's about as passive as you can get, other than keeping up with your lender, or if it ever default. I've never experienced it, but that would be work. But other than that, you're gonna have to invent something and find a royalty check.
And I'm sure with that, like, because you have so much experience with flipping, that you understand what a good investment is and a bad investment is. Like, I'm sure your worst case scenario is like, look, if I take over this project, I can do X, Y, and Z with it.
Absolutely. And I just know how to protect myself. I'm very good. I knock on some wood here, but I'm very good at vetting whom we lend to. I always do reference check, not background checks, but maybe I should, but I do reference checks. You know, I'm usually in part of these like high dollar real estate groups that if you're paying to be part of this, you're probably legit, mostly legit. And I also like finding people that my friends or people that I know have lent to before and they've been paid back. So it's got like a track record. So if you're brand new, you know, and you've never flipped a house before and you're not in any groups or know anybody, that's why I encourage people to network. But if nobody knows you, I'm probably not going to lend you on your first deal. I know it sucks. I know it's hard to get your first deal, but I'm not one to take that risk.
Yeah.
But if you've done 4 or 5 deals and I know the guy that was lending to you, guy or girl that was lending to you before, and you paid them back on time and they give you a good reference, let's do this, because I'm protected by deed of trust anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's really good advice too. And I tell people trying to do their first flip, I'm like, it's going to be hard to get somebody to give you the money without having any experience. And I know it's hard to get experience without the money, but you know, that's kind of where and I think that even lenders at this point now have gotten a lot more stringent of who they're allowing giving the money to, whereas a few years ago it was a little looser.
Yeah. Or if you can't get the money, then you need to start, if you can't get the money in normal terms, you know, you might have to give up 50, 60, 70% of that first deal to entice someone to lend to you. So I'll start considering a deal at 50, 60, 70% of the profit, as long as the numbers make sense to me. But even then I'm taking a risk because my numbers your numbers are based off the project going smoothly. And if you're inexperienced, then I might, the 50%, what's 50% of nothing? Nothing, right?
And that's another good point. Like, what have you seen now over the last 2 years when it's, you know, government was closed down and municipalities were closed down? Like, how much problems have you run into as far as getting permits and getting work approved and stuff like that over the last couple of years? Has it changed any way you do that at this point?
So our market has its pros and cons. So our market, we don't have those problems. You know, it's really small. You know, I live in a we're probably, I think I know we're in the capital of West Virginia, but West Virginia has a really low population, and so does where we live. And so, we have the city inspectors we could text message them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So we live in a different area, but pros and cons. We have very little competition as well, but we don't see $150,000 flip margins. Okay. The most we've probably ever seen on a home is probably 90, 100 grand on flipping a home. So you do that out in California, that's a low margin, right? In California, they're seeing 200,000-300,000, but you got to buy it for 2 million, right? We're buying houses we bought a house the other day for 7 grand. Okay. So there's it's different markets and different things. So to your point on that, not a lot of problems with that. Our biggest issue with COVID and all the stuff going on was getting material, and the prices being through the roof.
Yeah, so that's pretty much nationwide is what everybody's seeing with that. And,
yes.
And it's funny because you watch the financial news and they talk about inflation every single day, inflation. And I keep saying we're in inflation. Gas is higher, costs are higher, food is higher. It's already happening, but we keep trying to. So that's a whole different conversation that we could probably go on all day about. Knowing everything you know now, what would you do if you had to start over as an investor, right? Like if you had to start completely over again, but knowing what you know now, where do you think you would start in real estate? Would it be the same place you are now, or how would you do it differently?
If I had to do it over, and hindsight's always 2020, I would have done earlier what I did with Andrew and Steve in meeting with the right people sooner. My personality is I'm risk adverse. Okay. Now I'll take calculated risk all day. It's hard to get, how do I say that? I'll just say it, and hopefully nobody takes this the wrong way. It's hard to get to my financial position without taking risk somewhere. Okay. Sure. So I'll take risk, but I am very risk adverse in the fact that I will sometimes overanalyze or calculate a deal and I'll miss a deal. Okay. So I need someone to be the gas to my brakes. And so getting around the right people helped me do that. And now I always joke that I'm more like a clutch because my partners are always gas pedals, and I have to be like, well, let's just hold on a second, right? I'm not a brake anymore, but I'm still going to be a clutch. Okay. Yeah, that's good. I like that. But I would get around those people sooner. That if you're not going to push yourself, get around people that will push you. Educate yourself in as many ways as you can. Give something a try for longer than 3 to 6 months. Okay. I don't care if this is day trading, although I advise against that, but do what you want. But if a lot of people get caught up in this analysis paralysis, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know if I want to do rentals. I don't know if I want to do flips. I don't know if I want to do subject to. Do one of them. Okay. Just do one of them. Okay. Learn it, get real deep in one of them. And you'll find out within a year or so of if you like it or not, but at least you've done a deal. The one thing most will end up is it'll be a year later and they still haven't done any of them. So just do something, do one of them. Even if the numbers don't look fantastic, just get it out of the way. The first deal should be an educational expense anyway. If you lose 5-10 grand on your first deal, that's a good deal. You just paid 10 grand for an education that some people pay way more money for through a huge course or flipping course. Or think about how much people pay to go to college. 100 grand, 150 grand. You just paid 5-10 grand for an education that will probably make you more money than any degree. And you learned it quicker with under a year.
No, you're right. There's going to be an educational cost to everything. That's the best thing you can tell somebody, right? You're going to pay for it one way or the other. So I think that's amazing. I know you're educating people, and I think your YouTube channel is a great place for people to go, but where would you recommend people to go to kind of get more of what you're putting out? Is YouTube the best place to kind of catch you guys?
Yeah, so you can find me in multiple places. So YouTube is just my name, Jon Schoeller, just Jon, no H. And then on Instagram, the Frugal Investor. That was just a play on me being frugal. And then lastly, my wife and I, and then we brought in 2 partners recently, the FI couple on Instagram, Josh and Allie. We have this group called More Than Money, and we meet 2 to 3 times a month on Zoom, just like this, and everybody joins in, and we do 2 topics a month and then an open chat each month. And so the topics this month, so like next, I believe it's the 14th. Don't quote me on that, but the next More Than Money, I'm doing private money, how to lend it and how to borrow it. And then the one after that, we have a guest speaker talking about how to invest for your kids, your 529 plans, Roth IRAs, things like that. And then, so we do that every month, and just to help people reach financial independence and get that information from people who are actually doing it. And so that's why we started that group, and it's through Patreon.
That's awesome, dude. And again, even for, I'm in the business a long time, and I'm an experienced investor, and looking at your stuff, I really got a lot of I learned, right? So I think that if you're just looking to get into real estate, or you think you want to expand it, it's a great place of knowledge. I really appreciate you coming on. You were great. Thank you so much. And I got a lot out of it. And I'm looking for your stuff in the future, and I hope we can connect more in the future.
Absolutely. Let's do another one of these podcasts in the near future. If we get feedback from this one and people want to know more about a certain topic, I'd be happy to jump on here and dive into it with you.
That's awesome, dude. And thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
What a great guest Jon was today. I mean, I'm somebody who's been in business a long time as far as real estate and real estate investing. And even I got a lot out of it. And just his personal journey from what he went through becoming a father and his other businesses is really, really important for those who are out there who are trying to get into a business, be an entrepreneur, or even get into real estate and start their business. So great listen. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you check out the Real Estate Disruptors podcast on all platforms: Apple, Spotify, Anchor. We're on YouTube. Check it out. Check it out on our website, the Disruptors Network. On my personal website, raftybooknow.com, you can catch it, and hope to talk to you guys again soon.